Stop reacting to everything. The Mindset of Unshakable People. Full audiobook. Most people never lose because they're weak. They lose because they're reactive. They react to criticism. They react to rejection. They react to setbacks. They react to what people think, what people say, and what people do. And every reaction gives away a piece of their power. The strongest people in the world are not the loudest. They are not the most emotional. They are not the most aggressive. They are the most controlled. This audiobook is about developing the mindset of an unshakable person who remains calm when others panic, focused when others get distracted, and disciplined when others react. Because the moment you stop reacting to everything is the moment you start controlling your life. Chapter 1. Your reaction is your weakness. Most people spend their entire lives fighting the wrong enemy. They think their problems come from difficult circumstances. They blame bad luck. They blame difficult people. They blame the economy. They blame their past. They blame rejection. They blame failure. But if you look closely, you'll discover something powerful. The event is not the problem. Your reaction is. That's the truth most people never want to hear. Two people can experience the exact same setback and create completely different futures. One person loses a job and falls apart. Another person loses a job and builds a business. One person gets rejected and quits. Another person gets rejected and improves. One person faces criticism and becomes defensive. Another person faces criticism and becomes stronger. The event was the same. The outcome was different. Why? Because the event is not the problem. Your reaction is. That's the key. You have a choice. Every single day, life presents challenges. Some are small. Some are painful. Some feel unfair. But the challenge itself does not determine your future. Your response does. Most people never learn this lesson. Instead, they live in constant reaction mode. Someone says something negative. They react. Something doesn't go according to plan. They react. A problem appears. They react. A setback arrives. They react. And because they are constantly reacting, they never gain control. They become passengers in their own lives. They allow circumstances to dictate their emotions. They allow emotions to dictate their actions. And actions dictated by emotions almost always create regret. Think about the biggest mistakes you've ever made. Many of them probably happened during emotional moments. Moments of anger, moments of fear, moments of frustration, moments of insecurity. That's not an accident. Emotion narrows perspective. Emotion demands immediate action. Emotion tells you to do something right now. But wisdom says wait. Discipline says pause. Strength says think. That's the difference. It's not about intelligence. It's about discipline. You can be incredibly smart and still ruin your life through emotional reactions. You can be average in talent and still build on extraordinary life through emotional control. That's why this chapter matters. Because if you cannot control your reactions, you cannot control your direction. And if you cannot control your direction, you cannot control your future. The event is not the problem. Your reaction is. Never forget that. Now let's talk about the modern world. A world specifically designed to trigger reactions. Look at social media. Every platform competes for one thing: your attention. And the easiest way to capture attention is through emotion. Outrage, fear, jealousy, comparison, conflict. Every day, millions of people wake up and immediately surrender control of their emotions to a screen. They see someone's success. They react. They read a negative comment. They react. They see bad news. They react. They compare themselves to others. They react. And after hundreds of reactions, they wonder why they feel exhausted. Because reaction drains power. Reaction steals focus. Reaction destroys clarity. The reactive person becomes predictable, and predictable people become controllable. Think about that carefully. When someone knows exactly how to trigger you, they own part of your attention. When someone knows exactly how to provoke you, they control your emotions. When someone can make you angry whenever they choose, they possess influence over your behavior. You have a choice. You can continue giving people that power, or you can take it back. The strongest people are not impossible to insult. They are impossible to control. That's the distinction. That's the key. Consider public figures who operate under relentless criticism. Athletes, business leaders, entertainers. Every day they face judgment from thousands or even millions of people. Some criticism is fair. Some criticism is ridiculous. Some criticism is cruel. Yet the individuals who endure the longest understand something important. Responding to everything is impossible. Defending yourself against everyone is impossible. Winning every argument is impossible. Eventually, they learn a different strategy. They focus on their mission. They stop reacting. They conserve their energy. They choose action over emotional response. That's why they remain effective. Not because they avoid criticism, because they refuse to become consumed by it. Don't need their permission. You don't need everyone's approval. You don't need to explain yourself to every critic. Most people spend years trying to control how others perceive them. Unshakable people spend their time controlling themselves. There is a massive difference. One creates anxiety. The other creates freedom. Now let's go even deeper. At its core, emotional control is personal power, not physical power, not financial power. Personal power, the ability to govern yourself, the ability to remain calm when others lose control, the ability to stay focused when others become distracted, the ability to think clearly when others become emotional. That is power, real power, because life will test you again and again. Someone will disrespect you. Someone will doubt you. Someone will betray you. Something will fail. Something will go wrong. Something will disappoint you. The question is not whether these events will happen. They will. The question is who will be in control when they happen. You or your emotions? You have a choice. Always. The person who controls themselves cannot be controlled by others. Read that again in your mind. The person who controls themselves cannot be controlled by others. If your mood depends on circumstances, circumstances control you. If your confidence depends on approval, other people control you. If your peace depends on perfection, life controls you. But when your emotional state comes from within, everything changes. Now you become stable. Now you become resilient. Now you become dangerous in the best possible way, because chaos no longer dictates your behavior. That's why emotional control is not weakness. It is strength. Many people confuse calmness with passivity. They think emotional restraint means doing nothing. Not true. Emotional restraint means choosing your response, not suppressing your response. Choosing it deliberately, intelligently, strategically. That's the difference. Control the reaction. Control the outcome. Control the reaction. Control the outcome. Remember that phrase. Repeat it often, because every major improvement in your life begins there. Better relationships, better decisions, better opportunities, better leadership, better results. Everything improves when your reactions improve. The event is not the problem. Your reaction is. Control the reaction. Control the outcome. This is the foundation of becoming unshakable, not perfection. Talent, not luck. Control, self-control, emotional control, reaction control. Master this principle and you immediately separate yourself from the majority of people. Because most people spend their lives reacting, you are learning how to lead yourself instead. And that changes everything. You have taken the first step. You understand that your greatest enemy is not the outside world. It is uncontrolled reaction. Master that, and you begin reclaiming your power. Because the person who controls their reactions controls their future. You understand the danger of reacting. Now it's time to learn the skill that makes emotional control possible. The pause, the space between stimulus and response. The moment where power is created. Chapter 2. Pause before you respond. Most people believe power comes from action. It doesn't. Power comes from control. And control comes from one simple ability. The ability to pause. Not forever. Not for hours. Just long enough to stop your emotions from making decisions for you. That is where power lives. In the gap. The gap between what happens and what you do next. The gap between stimulus and response. The gap between emotion and action. Most people never learn to use that gap. As a result, they spend their lives reacting. Something happens. They immediately respond. Someone criticizes them. They immediately defend themselves. Someone disagrees with them. They immediately argue. A problem appears. They immediately panic. And because they react instantly, they surrender the one thing that could have saved them. Perspective. That's the key. You have a choice. Every single reaction passes through a moment. A tiny moment. A brief opening. A space where you can either become emotional or remain intentional. Most people miss it. Unshakable people don't. They use it. They expand it. They train it. Because they understand something the average person never realizes. Most mistakes happen in moments of emotional urgency. Read that again. Most mistakes happen in moments of emotional urgency. Not because people are bad. Not because people are incapable. Because people become rushed. Emotion creates urgency. Urgency creates reaction. Reaction creates regret. How many arguments started because someone reacted too quickly? How many relationships ended because someone spoke before thinking? How many careers were damaged because someone sent the angry message? How many opportunities disappeared because fear made someone quit too soon? The pattern is everywhere. The problem is rarely the event. The problem is the speed of the reaction. That's why your new rule must become simple. Pause first. Decide second. Pause first. Decide second. Pause first. Decide second. Make it your default setting. Someone insults you. Pause first. Decide second. You receive bad news. Pause first. Decide second. You feel rejected. Pause first. Decide second. You feel angry. Pause first. Decide second. Because the first emotion is rarely your wisest advisor. The first emotion wants immediate relief. Wisdom wants the right outcome, and those are often very different things. You have a choice. Most people think strength means reacting immediately. They think confidence means always having an answer. They think leadership means always speaking first. Not true. Real strength often looks like restraint. Real confidence often looks like patience. Real leadership often looks like silence. Because strong people don't rush. They observe. They assess. They choose. That's the key. Now let's talk about the 3 emotions that destroy more opportunities than almost anything else. Anger, fear, and frustration. Anger is powerful, but anger is also dangerous. Anger narrows your vision. When you're angry, you stop seeing the whole picture. You see only the offense, only the insult, only the problem. That's why angry decisions often become expensive decisions. One conversation, one message, one reaction, one emotional outburst, and suddenly months or years of progress are damaged. Not because of the event, because of the reaction. You have a choice. Pause first. Decide second. Fear operates differently. Fear doesn't make you attack. Fear makes you retreat. Fear tells you not to apply, not to start, not to speak, not to risk, not to try. Fear creates hesitation. Fear convinces people to abandon opportunities before they even begin. But fear is also temporary. That's what most people forget. The emotion feels permanent. The reality isn't. If you pause long enough, fear loses intensity. If you pause long enough, logic returns. If you pause long enough, courage becomes available. That's the key. Then comes frustration, one of the most common emotional traps in modern life. Traffic, delays, difficult people, slow progress, unmet expectations. Frustration whispers a dangerous message. It's not happening fast enough. And because people believe that message, they quit. Too early, too often, too soon. But successful people understand something important. Progress is often slower than expected. Growth is often invisible at first. Results often take longer than emotions can tolerate. That's why discipline matters. It's not about impatience. It's about persistence. It's not about emotion. It's about discipline. Successful people train themselves to delay emotional responses. They don't eliminate emotion. They manage it. There is a difference. The goal is not becoming emotionless. The goal is becoming intentional. You will still feel anger. You will still feel fear. You will still feel frustration. But you no longer obey them automatically. You pause, you think, you choose. That is emotional maturity. That is self-control. That is power. Let's make this practical. Imagine a negotiation. One person becomes emotional. They become desperate. They become reactive. They reveal too much. They rush decisions. They lose leverage. The other person remains calm. They listen more than they speak. They stay patient. They stay composed. Who gains the advantage? The calm person. Always. Because emotional urgency weakens position. Patience strengthens position. Now imagine leadership. A team faces a problem. Everyone is worried. Everyone is stressed. Everyone is emotional. The leader has two choices: react emotionally or remain steady. The leader who panics spreads panic. The leader who remains calm spreads confidence. People trust stability. That's the key. Now think about relationships. Most relationship damage comes from moments, not years. Moments. One emotional reaction. One angry statement. One impulsive decision. One unnecessary escalation. And suddenly trust is damaged. Connection weakens. Distance grows. The calm person understands something important. Not every thought deserves expression. Not every feeling deserves action. Not every emotion deserves obedience. You have a choice. When emotions rise, pause. When tension rises, pause. When anger rises, pause. When fear rises, pause. The pause is not weakness. The pause is strategy. The pause protects your future from your temporary emotions. Remember that. Temporary emotions should never make permanent decisions. Yet millions of people allow exactly that to happen every day. Don't be one of them. Create a new habit. When something triggers you, take one breath, then another, then another. Ask yourself a simple question. What outcome do I want? Not, what do I feel? Not, what do I want to say? Not, how do I prove I'm right? What outcome do I want? That question changes everything, because it shifts your focus from reaction to results. And results are what matter. Always pause first. Decide second. Make that your rule. Make that your standard. Make that your identity. Because the calm person gains leverage while emotional people surrender it. The calm person gains perspective while emotional people lose it. The calm person gains control while emotional people give it away. And remember the larger lesson of this audiobook. Every reaction either strengthens your life or weakens it. Every pause creates an opportunity to choose wisely. Every moment of restraint builds personal power. You are not trying to eliminate emotion. You are learning to lead it. That is what unshakable people do. They pause, they think, they choose. And because they choose, they remain in control. You have learned where power exists. It exists in the gap, the space between stimulus and response. Master that space, and you begin mastering yourself. But there is another trap that causes people to react emotionally over and over again: the need for approval. The desperate desire to be liked, accepted, and validated. Let's confront that weakness next. Chapter 3. Stop seeking approval. Chapter 3. Stop seeking approval. Most people are not controlled by reality. They are controlled by opinions, other people's opinions. And once you are controlled by opinions, you are no longer free. You are dependent, emotionally dependent, mentally dependent. Behaviorally dependent. That is the cost of seeking approval. It looks harmless at first. A desire to be liked, a desire to be accepted, a desire to be understood. But slowly, it becomes something deeper, something dangerous. You start adjusting yourself. You start editing your thoughts. You start filtering your actions. You start delaying your decisions, all for approval. And without realizing it, you stop living your life. You start performing a version of it. That's the truth most people never face. The need for validation creates emotional dependence, and emotional dependence destroys self-direction. You have a choice. You can live for approval, or you can live for purpose, but you cannot do both. That's the key. Approval-seeking forces people to react to every opinion. Think about that. Every comment matters. Every criticism matters. Every judgment matters. Every rejection matters. And when everything matters, nothing is stable. Your emotional state becomes fragile. Someone praises you. You feel high. Someone criticizes you. You feel low. Someone ignores you. You feel invisible. You are no longer in control. You are reacting to external feedback like a machine. Input determines emotion. Emotion determines action. That is not strength. That is dependency. And dependency is exactly what keeps people stuck. You have a choice. Stop giving the world permission to control your emotional state. Because every time you seek approval, you hand over control. Quietly, subtly, without noticing it. Now let's go deeper. Most dreams do not fail because people are incapable. Most dreams fail because people cannot tolerate criticism. They cannot tolerate rejection. They cannot tolerate disapproval. So they stop. Too early, too often, too quietly. Think about entrepreneurs, creators, leaders, people who built something meaningful. Almost none of them started with approval. They started with doubt. They started with criticism. They started with resistance. People told them it wouldn't work. People told them to stop. People told them they were wasting time. But they did not pause their mission to collect opinions. They continued. That's the difference. You don't need their permission. You never did. You don't need their agreement. You don't need their validation. You don't need their understanding. You need persistence. Because approval is not the price of progress. Discipline is. Now listen carefully. The world is full of people who will never support your vision. Not because your vision is wrong, but because your vision is not theirs. And people tend to resist what they do not understand. So if you wait for universal approval, you will wait forever. You will delay action. You will delay growth. You will delay transformation. And eventually, you will delay your entire life. That's why this rule matters. Your mission matters more than their opinion. Say it again. Your mission matters more than their opinion. Again. Your mission matters more than their opinion. Let that become your filter. Before you react, before you explain, before you defend, ask yourself one question. Does this move my mission forward? Or does this move me closer to approval? Because those two paths are not the same. One leads to freedom. The other leads to dependence. You have a choice. Let's make this real. Imagine a creator posting online for the first time. They share an idea. No engagement. No validation. A few negative comments. Most people would stop. They would interpret silence as failure. They would interpret criticism as proof they are wrong. So they adjust themselves. They dilute their message. They start creating for approval instead of expression. And slowly, their original vision disappears. Now imagine another creator. Same situation. No engagement. Some criticism. Some doubt. But they understand something important. The reaction of others does not define the value of the work. So they continue. They improve. They refine. They stay consistent. Eventually, results appear, not because approval arrived first, but because discipline stayed consistent first. That's the difference. Approval seekers quit early. Purpose-driven people continue regardless. Now think about relationships. People often change themselves to be accepted. They hide opinions. They suppress truth. They pretend to be someone else, just to avoid rejection. But here is the truth. If you must become someone else to be accepted, you are not being accepted. You are being edited. You are being filtered. You are being reshaped for convenience. That is not connection. That is compromise. And over time, that compromise destroys identity. You have a choice. Be accepted for who you are, or be liked for who you are pretending to be. But only one of those creates peace. Let's be direct. Approval is unpredictable. It changes with moods. It changes with trends. It changes with perception. It changes with misunderstanding. If your stability depends on something that's unstable, your life will always feel unstable. That's why freedom begins when approval becomes unnecessary. Not optional, not occasional, unnecessary. When you no longer need approval, you stop reacting to it. Negative opinion loses power. Positive opinion loses control. You become steady. You become consistent. You become unshakable. That's the key. And remember this. People who are dependent on approval are easy to manipulate. They can be pushed by praise. They can be stopped by criticism. They can be redirected by judgment. But people who do not need approval, they cannot be controlled through emotion. They cannot be influenced through pressure. They cannot be stopped through opinion. That is personal power. Now connect this to everything you have learned so far. Your reaction is your weakness. Pause before you respond. Stop seeking approval. All three point to one truth. Your power is internal, not external, not dependent, not borrowed. Internal. You control your reactions. You control your response time. You control your need for validation. And when you control those three things, your life stops being reactive. It becomes intentional. It becomes deliberate. It becomes yours. So moving forward, there is only one standard. Your mission matters more than their opinion. Your mission matters more than their opinion. Your mission matters more than their opinion. Live by that. Act from that. Protect that. Because the moment you stop needing approval, you stop reacting to rejection. You stop reacting to criticism. You stop reacting to silence. And you finally start moving with clarity. But there is still one more trap that keeps people emotionally unstable. One more source of unnecessary suffering. The inability to detach from what cannot be controlled. That is where most emotional chaos comes from. And that is what we will confront next. Chapter 4. Detach from what you cannot control. Chapter 4. Detach from what you cannot control. Most people are not suffering because their lives are difficult. They are suffering because their focus is wrong. They are focused on what they cannot control. And when you focus on what you cannot control, you lose control of yourself. That is the real problem. Not the situation, not the outcome, not the uncertainty, but the obsession with things that are outside your influence. Most anxiety comes from trying to manage things outside your control. Let that sink in. Most anxiety, not some, not a few cases. Most anxiety comes from trying to manage what you cannot manage. People try to control outcomes. They try to control timing. They try to control opinions. They try to control reactions. They try to control uncertainty. And when reality refuses to cooperate, they break internally. They become stressed. They become frustrated. They become overwhelmed. Not because life is too heavy, but because their focus is misplaced. You have a choice. You can fight reality, or you can align with it. That's the key. People exhaust themselves fighting reality every single day. They want things to happen faster. They want people to behave differently. They want situations to unfold in a specific way. And when that doesn't happen, they interpret it as failure. But reality is not obligated to follow expectation. Reality simply unfolds. Your job is not to control reality. Your job is to respond to it correctly. That is where power exists. Now listen carefully. There are only two categories in your life: things you can control and things you cannot control. That's it. Everything else is confusion. And confusion creates anxiety. You can control your actions. You can control your effort. You can control your preparation. You can control your discipline. You can control your focus. But you cannot control outcomes. You cannot control timing. You cannot control other people. You cannot control opinions. You cannot control external events. You have a choice. Focus only on what belongs to you, or waste energy on what does not. One builds peace. The other builds pressure. That's the key. Most people get this backwards. They obsess over results. They obsess over approval. They obsess over timing. They obsess over uncertainty. But they neglect the only thing that actually matters: their actions. And when you neglect actions, outcomes suffer anyway. So you end up stressed and ineffective at the same time. That is the worst combination. Stress without control, effort without direction, energy without impact. Now let's make this practical. If you are working on a goal, your job is simple. Do the work. Improve the work. Repeat the work. That is your control zone. Nothing else matters. Not how fast success comes. Not how others respond. Not how the situation looks today. You do not negotiate with uncertainty. You execute through it. You have a choice. Either obsess over what might happen, or commit to what you are doing right now. That is the separation between anxiety and clarity. Now let's talk about what happens when people ignore this principle. They start checking results constantly. They refresh numbers. They check responses. They check progress too early. They check outcomes before effort has fully compounded. And every time results don't match expectation, they react emotionally. Stress increases, confidence decreases, focus collapses, and ironically, performance gets worse. because attention shifted away from action. That is the trap. The mind becomes addicted to outcomes it cannot control and forgets the process it can control. So the rule must be simple. Control your actions. Release the rest. Say it again. Control your actions. Release the rest. Again. Control your actions. Release the rest. That is not passive thinking. That is strategic focus. Because when you release what you cannot control, you recover energy. You recover clarity. You recover direction. Now think about high performers, athletes, entrepreneurs, leaders. They do not succeed because they control outcomes. They succeed because they control inputs, training, preparation, repetition, execution. They focus on what is repeatable, not what is unpredictable. The outcome is never guaranteed, but preparation always is. That's the key. Now let's go deeper. Detachment does not mean indifference. Detachment means clarity. It means you care about your actions more than your anxiety. It means you stay committed without becoming emotionally unstable. It means you remain consistent regardless of temporary uncertainty. Most people misunderstand this. They think caring deeply means worrying constantly. That is false. Worry is not care. Worry is lack of control. Real care is disciplined action, not emotional chaos. You have a choice. Stay attached to outcomes or stay committed to actions. One drains you, the other builds you. Now think about relationships. People often suffer because they try to control how others feel. They try to control responses. They try to control attention. They try to control emotional reactions. But you cannot control another human being's internal world. You can only control your behavior, your communication, your consistency, your respect. Everything else is outside your control. When people accept this, relationships become healthier. Less tension, less expectation, less emotional pressure, more clarity, because control was never the solution. Understanding was. Now apply this to your life again. Every time you feel anxiety, ask one question. Is this within my control? If yes, act. If no, release it. That single question can eliminate unnecessary stress from your life, but only if you actually follow it, not understand it. Follow it. You have a choice. You can keep mentally fighting battles you cannot win, or you can step back and focus on what actually responds to your effort. That is where peace comes from, not from perfect conditions. Not from guaranteed outcomes, but from correct focus. Control your actions. Release the rest. That is the discipline. That is the mindset. That is the foundation of emotional stability. Because when you detach from what you cannot control, something powerful happens. Your mind becomes clear. Your energy becomes focused. Your decisions become intentional, and your reactions lose urgency. You are no longer pulled in every direction by uncertainty. You become grounded in action, and action is the only thing that builds results. Now connect this back to everything you have learned so far. Your reactions are your weakness. You must pause before responding. You must stop seeking approval, and now you must detach from what you cannot control. All of these point to one truth. Control yourself, not the world, not others, not outcomes. Yourself. That is the only real source of power. And once you understand that, anxiety loses its grip. Because anxiety always comes from trying to control what was never yours to control. Release that illusion. Return to action. Return to discipline. Return to focus. And you regain your power. But there is still another layer. A deeper form of discipline. One that most people never reach. Silence. The discipline of not reacting unnecessarily. The discipline of speaking less and observing more. That is where true control begins to stabilize. Chapter 5. The Art of Silent Discipline. Chapter 5. Master the Art of Silence. Most people think strength is loud. They think strength is explaining themselves. They think strength is defending every opinion, correcting every misunderstanding, and responding to every attack. That is not strength. That is emotional exhaustion. And emotional exhaustion is a sign of no control. Real strength is quieter. Real strength is controlled. Real strength does not react to everything. Not every criticism deserves a response. Not every misunderstanding requires an explanation. Let that settle. Not every criticism deserves a response. Not every misunderstanding requires an explanation. You have a choice. You can respond to everything, or you can protect your energy. That's the key. Most people lose their power because they spend it constantly defending themselves. They explain too much. They justify too much. They argue too much. They try to convince people who were never interested in understanding them. And in doing so, they reveal something important. They are not in control of themselves, because controlled people do not need constant validation. Controlled people do not need constant defense. Controlled people understand something deeper. Silence is often interpreted as strength. Constant defense communicates insecurity. Think about that. When you constantly explain yourself, you are not convincing others. You are revealing dependence on their approval. When you constantly defend yourself, you are not protecting your image. You are exposing your need to be understood. But when you stay silent in the right moments, something changes. You take control of the situation. You remove emotional fuel. You remove unnecessary conflict. You remove wasted energy. You have a choice. Respond emotionally or respond strategically. That's the key. Now let's go deeper. Silence is not avoidance. Silence is discipline. Silence is not weakness. Silence is control. Silence is the ability to withhold reaction when reaction adds nothing valuable. Most people misunderstand this. They think silence means you have nothing to say. That is false. Silence means you understand when speaking is unnecessary. That is power. Because speaking constantly is not communication. It is compulsion. And compulsion is a form of lack of control. Now look at high performers, business leaders, athletes, creators. They do not respond to every opinion. They do not explain every decision. They do not argue with every critic. They operate differently. They move in silence. They focus on execution. They let outcomes speak. That's the key. Let results do the talking. Say it again. Let results do the talking. Again. Let results do the talking. Because results are undeniable. Opinions are temporary. Results are permanent. Opinions change. Results remain. And the people who understand this stop wasting energy on defense. They focus on output. They focus on consistency. They focus on discipline. Now think about real examples. An athlete criticized before a major competition does not stop to argue. They train. They perform. They win. A business leader doubted in the early stages does not spend years explaining their vision to skeptics. They build. They execute. They scale. A creator receiving negative comments does not respond to every insult. They continue creating. They continue producing. They continue improving. And over time, something happens. Results override noise. Always. You have a choice. Engage in endless explanations. Or build something that speaks for itself. That's the key. Now let's be direct. Most people talk too much because they are trying to control perception. They want to be understood immediately. They want to correct every misunderstanding instantly. They want to fix every false assumption right away. But here is the truth. You do not control how people interpret you. You only control what you produce. And production speaks louder than explanation. That is why silence is powerful. It removes unnecessary resistance. It removes emotional escalation. It removes wasted effort. When you stop reacting to every comment, you regain energy. When you stop defending every opinion, you regain focus. When you stop explaining every decision, you regain clarity. And clarity is where performance begins. Now apply this to daily life. Someone misunderstands you. Pause. You do not immediately explain. Someone criticizes your path. Pause. You do not immediately defend. Someone questions your decisions. Pause. You assess whether response is even necessary. Most of the time, it is not. Because most opinions do not affect your outcome. They only affect your emotions. And emotions are what you are learning to control. You have a choice. Stay reactive or stay disciplined. That's the key. Now let's talk about insecurity. Insecure people speak quickly. They defend quickly. They react quickly. They feel the need to justify their existence through constant explanation. But secure people operate differently. They do not rush to be understood. They focus on being effective. And effectiveness eventually eliminates confusion. Because results clarify everything. Let results do the talking. That is not arrogance. That is efficiency. Now think about relationships again. Many conflicts escalate because of unnecessary words. One person reacts, the other responds. Then both escalate. And suddenly a small misunderstanding becomes a major conflict. Not because of the situation, because of the reaction to the situation. Silence could have ended it. But reaction extended it. You have a choice. Break the cycle or continue it. That's the key. Now understand this deeply. Silence does not mean you accept disrespect. Silence means you choose when and how to respond. That is control. not avoidance. Control. Because when you respond without control, you lose power. But when you respond strategically, you maintain it. That is the difference. Now connect this to everything you have learned so far. You are learning not to react to everything. You are learning to pause before responding. You are learning to stop seeking approval. You are learning to detach from what you cannot control. And now you are learning to master silence. All of it leads to one identity: the unshakable person. The person who does not waste energy on emotional reactions. The person who does not need constant validation. The person who does not fight battles that do not matter. The person who moves with intention. That is who you are becoming. And silence is one of the strongest tools in that transformation. Because silence protects your energy. Silence protects your focus. Silence protects your discipline. And discipline is everything. Now remember this. You do not need to respond to everything. You do not need to explain everything. You do not need to defend everything. You have a choice. Speak when it matters. Remain silent when it does not. That's the key. And when you master that balance, something powerful happens. You stop reacting. You start observing. You stop defending. You start building. You stop wasting energy. You start creating results. And results eliminate the need for explanation. That is why the strongest people often say the least. Not because they lack words, because they understand value. And now you understand it too. But silence alone is not enough. Because even silent people can still be emotionally reactive internally. The next step is deeper, controlling your inner dialogue. The way you speak to yourself when no one is watching. That is where true discipline is tested. Chapter 6. Stop taking everything personally. Chapter 6. Stop taking everything personally. Most people suffer more in their minds than they ever do in reality. Not because reality is harsh, but because they take everything personally. Every comment, every criticism, every tone, every look, every delay, every silence. They turn neutral events into personal attacks. And once everything becomes personal, everything becomes painful. That is the trap. That is the weakness. Most people's actions reveal more about them than about you. Let that sink in. Most people's actions reveal more about them than about you. Not everything directed at you is actually about you. Not every insult is accurate. Not every criticism is fair. Not every judgment is objective. People project. They project fear. They project insecurity. They project frustration. They project their internal chaos onto external targets. And often, that target is you. You have a choice. You can absorb everything personally, or you can observe it objectively. That's the key. When you take things personally, you lose control of your emotional state. When you stop taking things personally, you regain control of your mind. Most emotional suffering is not caused by events. It is caused by interpretation. And the wrong interpretation is always this. This is about me. But in most cases, it is not. It is about them, their frustration, their insecurity, their stress, their bias, their mood, their unresolved issues, their fear of failure, their need to feel superior. It is not about you. That is the truth most people struggle to accept. Because taking things personally feels natural. It feels immediate. It feels emotional. but it is rarely accurate. That's the key. Now listen carefully. Emotionally resilient people understand this distinction. They do not absorb negativity. They observe it. There is a difference. Absorbing means internalizing it, letting it shape your identity, letting it affect your confidence, letting it influence your decisions. Observing means stepping back, seeing it clearly, without attachment, without distortion, without emotional contamination. You have a choice. Absorb everything or observe everything. That's the key. When someone criticizes you, the reactive mind says, "They are attacking me." But the disciplined mind says, "What is this really coming from?" Because emotionally stable people understand something important. Criticism often reflects the critic more than the target. Someone who is stressed criticizes. Someone who is insecure criticizes. Someone who is projecting failure criticizes. Someone who is struggling internally criticizes. And when you understand this, criticism loses power. It stops being personal. It becomes information, not identity. Information, not definition. That is a critical shift, because once something stops defining you, it stops controlling you. It is not about you. Say it again. It is not about you. Again. It is not about you. Let that become your mental filter. Every time something triggers you, repeat it internally. It is not about you. Every time someone reacts emotionally toward you, repeat it. It is not about you. Every time you feel attacked, repeat it. It is not about you. Because that one phrase breaks the emotional chain. It stops automatic reaction. It creates space, and space creates control. Now think about real situations. Someone ignores your message. Most people take it personally. They don't respect me. But in reality, they might be busy, distracted, overwhelmed, or dealing with their own priorities. It is not about you. Someone criticizes your work. Most people take it personally. They think I'm not good enough. But in reality, they might be projecting their own standards or frustrations. It is not about you. Someone disagrees with your opinion. Most people take it personally. They are against me. But in reality, they simply see things differently. It is not about you. You have a choice. Interpret everything as personal, or interpret everything as neutral. That's the key. Now let's go deeper. Emotionally resilient people are not unaffected by life. They are unaffected by unnecessary meaning. They do not attach identity to every event. They do not convert every interaction into judgment of self-worth. They separate behavior from identity, action from value, opinion from truth. That separation is power. Because once you stop confusing opinion with identity, you become stable. Now think about this. How much emotional weight do people carry simply because they misunderstood intent? How many arguments start because someone assumed meaning that was never intended? How many relationships suffer because people personalize neutral behavior? The answer is most of them. And all of it is preventable. If you stop taking everything personally. Now let's bring discipline into this. When something happens, pause. Do not immediately assign meaning. Do not immediately assign intent. Do not immediately assign judgment. First, observe. Then question. Is this actually about me? Or is this about them? Most of the time, it is about them. That realization alone removes unnecessary emotional burden. You have a choice. Carry emotional weight that does not belong to you, or release it immediately. That's the key. Now let's connect this to real strength. Strong people are not people who feel nothing. Strong people are people who do not over-identify with everything. They maintain emotional distance from unnecessary interpretation. They do not allow every comment to shape their identity. They do not allow every reaction to define their worth. They do not allow every moment to become personal. That is emotional maturity. That is control. That is discipline. And discipline is always the goal. Now think about criticism again. If you take it personally, you suffer twice. Once from the event, once from the interpretation. But if you remove personal meaning, you only deal with reality once. That is efficiency. That is clarity. That is power. It is not about you. It never was. Now connect this back to everything you have learned so far. You are learning not to react to everything. You are learning to pause before responding. You are learning to stop seeking approval. You are learning to detach from what you cannot control. You are learning to master silence. And now you are learning not to take things personally. All of it builds one identity, the unshakable person. The person who does not emotionally collapse under interpretation. The person who sees reality clearly. The person who responds instead of reacts. The person who chooses meaning instead of absorbing chaos. That is who you are becoming. And every time you remind yourself, it is not about you, you reinforce that identity. You weaken emotional reactivity. You strengthen clarity. You reclaim control. Because control is not about controlling others. Control is about controlling interpretation. And interpretation shapes everything. Now remember this. You will not always be treated fairly. You will not always be understood correctly. You will not always be judged accurately. But none of that has to define you. You have a choice. Let it define you, or let it pass through you. That's the key. And when you stop taking everything personally, something powerful happens. Life becomes lighter. Decisions become clearer. Emotions become stable. And your focus returns to what actually matters. Your actions, your discipline, your growth. Because at the end of the day, the world will always speak. But not everything the world says deserves your identity. It is not about you. And once you truly understand that, you become harder to shake. But there is still one more layer of discipline left. One more mental shift that separates reactive people from truly unshakable ones. The ability to turn discomfort into strength. To train yourself through difficulty instead of avoiding it. That is where real mental toughness begins. Chapter 7. Train yourself to be uncomfortable. Chapter 7. Train yourself to be uncomfortable. Most people do not lack intelligence. They do not lack opportunity. They do not lack potential. They lack tolerance for discomfort. That is the real separator. Not talent, not luck, not circumstances. Discomfort tolerance. Because comfort creates weakness. And weakness is always invisible at first. It feels safe. It feels normal. It feels easy. But over time, comfort quietly destroys discipline. And without discipline, nothing meaningful survives. Comfort creates weakness. That is the truth most people avoid. Comfort creates weakness. Growth requires repeated exposure to difficulty. Let that settle. Growth does not come from ease. Growth comes from resistance, from friction, from effort that feels uncomfortable in the moment. You have a choice. You can choose comfort, or you can choose growth. That's the key. Most people unconsciously choose comfort every single day. They sleep a little longer. They avoid difficult conversations. They delay important work. They escape pressure. They choose the path of least resistance. And then they wonder why their life does not change. But change requires discomfort. Always. Because anything meaningful demands resistance. If it were easy, everyone would do it. If it were comfortable, it would not be valuable. Now listen carefully. Successful people are not different because they avoid discomfort. They are different because they seek it. They voluntarily step into it. They train themselves through it. They expose themselves to it repeatedly until it becomes normal. That is the secret, not avoidance. Exposure. You have a choice. Avoid discomfort or train through it. That's the key. Now let's make this real. Successful people wake up early not because early mornings are enjoyable, but because discipline is built when comfort is absent. They train when they are tired. They work when they do not feel motivated. They push when others stop. They operate outside emotional comfort. And over time, something changes. What once felt difficult becomes normal. What once felt heavy becomes automatic. What once required effort becomes identity. That is how transformation happens. Through repetition, through discomfort, through consistency. Comfort weakens, challenge strengthens. Say it again. Comfort weakens, challenge strengthens. Again, comfort weakens, challenge strengthens. This is not motivational language. This is behavioral truth. Every time you avoid discomfort, you reinforce weakness. Every time you face discomfort, you reinforce strength. That is how identity is formed. Not in theory, in repetition. Now think about difficult conversations. Most people avoid them. They delay them. They soften them. They escape them. Because discomfort feels threatening. But avoidance does not remove the problem. It extends it. Successful people understand something different. Temporary discomfort prevents long-term damage. So they step into the conversation. They speak clearly. They stay present. They deal with tension directly. Not because it feels good, but because it builds strength. You have a choice. Avoid discomfort today, or prevent chaos tomorrow. That's the key. Now think about discipline. Discipline is not built in moments of inspiration. It is built in moments of resistance. When you do what you said you would do even when you do not feel like it. When you show up even when motivation is missing. When you act even when resistance is strong. That is training, not theory. Training. Most people think mental toughness is a personality trait. It is not. It is a habit, a repeated behavior under pressure, built slowly, built consistently, built through discomfort. Now let's go deeper. The human brain naturally seeks comfort. It avoids pain. It avoids effort. It avoids uncertainty. That is normal, but normal does not create excellence. So you must override normal. You must train beyond instinct. You must choose discomfort intentionally. You have a choice. Follow instinct or train discipline. That's the key. Now consider this. Every time you choose comfort, you weaken your tolerance for difficulty. Every time you choose challenge, you strengthen your tolerance for difficulty. This means your daily choices are shaping your future identity. Not dramatically, not instantly, but quietly, consistently, over time. That is why small decisions matter, because they accumulate. Now think about high performers again. Athletes, entrepreneurs, creators. They are not constantly motivated. They are constantly trained. Training replaces motivation. Discipline replaces emotion. Consistency replaces inspiration. They do not wait to feel ready. They act until readiness becomes irrelevant. That is the difference. Now apply this to your life. If something is difficult, do not avoid it. If something is uncomfortable, do not escape it. If something is challenging, do not delay it. Instead, recognize it as training, because discomfort is not a signal to stop. It is a signal to grow. That's the key. Now let's bring this together. Comfort is not your friend. Comfort is your limitation disguised as safety. It keeps you where you are. It prevents evolution. It maintains stagnation while making it feel acceptable. But challenge is different. Challenge forces adaptation. Challenge forces growth. Challenge forces discipline. And discipline is the foundation of everything you want. You have a choice. Stay in comfort or step into challenge. That's the key. Now think about your daily life. Every avoidance is a vote for weakness. Every action through discomfort is a vote for strength. And over time, those votes determine who you become. Not once, not occasionally, but repeatedly. That is why mental toughness is built through repetition. Not insight, not understanding. Repetition. Comfort weakens. Challenge strengthens. Let that become your internal rule. Comfort weakens. Challenge strengthens. Again, comfort weakens. Challenge strengthens. Now connect this to everything so far. You are learning not to react to everything. You are learning to pause before responding. You are learning to stop seeking approval. You are learning to detach from what you cannot control. You are learning to master silence. You are learning not to take things personally. And now you are learning to train through discomfort. All of it forms one identity, the unshakable person. The person who does not avoid difficulty. The person who does not escape discomfort. The person who uses challenge as training. That is who you are becoming. And every time you choose discomfort over comfort, you reinforce that identity. You become harder to break, harder to distract, harder to stop. Because discipline replaces emotion. Now remember this. Comfort will always feel easier, but ease is not the goal. Strength is, growth is, freedom is, and those require discomfort. Always. So stop avoiding it. Start using it. Because what you resist controls you, but what you face transforms you. And that is the foundation of real mental toughness. But there is still another layer, a deeper battlefield, the space where most people lose their focus entirely, the battlefield of attention, where distractions constantly pull you away from your mission. That is where the next discipline begins. Chapter 8. Focus on the mission, not the noise. Chapter 8. Focus on the mission, not the drama. Most people are not failing because they lack ability. They are failing because they lack focus. Not intelligence, not opportunity. Focus. Because attention is your most valuable resource, and most people give it away freely. To drama, to emotion, to distraction, to noise. Reactive people become distracted by daily emotional noise. Let that settle. Reactive people do not control their attention. Their attention is controlled for them by notifications, by opinions, by conflicts, by emotional situations that have no long-term value. They wake up with intention, but they live with reaction. Something happens. They respond. Something is said. They react. Something appears online. They engage. And at the end of the day, they are exhausted. Not because they worked hard, but because they focused on the wrong things. You have a choice. You can live in reaction, or you can live in direction. That's the key. Focused people remain committed to long-term objectives. They do not get pulled into every emotional situation. They do not respond to every distraction. They do not engage with every piece of noise. They understand something simple. Not everything deserves attention. Not everything deserves energy. Not everything deserves a response. Now listen carefully. Every distraction steals energy from meaningful goals. Every single one. Not some. All. When you engage in drama, you lose momentum. When you engage in unnecessary conflict, you lose clarity. When you engage in emotional noise, you lose focus. And what you lose in focus, you lose in progress. That is why distracted people stay stuck. Not because they are inactive, but because they are misdirected. They are busy, but not effective. They are engaged, but not aligned. They are reacting, but not building. You have a choice. Stay reactive or stay aligned. That's the key. Now think about modern life. It is designed for distraction. Everything competes for your attention. Every app, every message, every headline, every opinion, and most of it is not important, but it feels important. That is the trap. Drama feels urgent, but rarely matters. Let that sink in. Drama feels urgent, but rarely matters. Urgency is emotional. Importance is logical. And most people confuse the two. They treat emotional urgency as priority. They treat noise as significance. And as a result, they live in constant reaction. But unshakable people operate differently. They filter everything through one question. Does this move my mission forward? If yes, they engage. If no, they ignore. Simple, clean, powerful. That's the key. Now let's bring this into real behavior. Someone starts a conflict online. Do you engage? No, not unless it serves your mission. Someone tries to provoke you. Do you respond emotionally? No, not unless it matters long term. Someone presents drama in your environment. Do you absorb it? No, you redirect your attention. Because attention is not unlimited. It is your most valuable resource. And where your attention goes, your life follows. You have a choice. Spend attention on noise, or invest attention in growth. That's the key. Now think about successful people. They are not free from distraction. They are disciplined in response to distraction. They see the same noise everyone else sees. They experience the same emotional triggers, but they choose differently. They stay focused on execution, on building, on improving, on long-term goals, not short-term emotional reactions. Now repeat this. Stay focused on the mission. Say it again. Stay focused on the mission. Again. Stay focused on the mission. Because repetition creates discipline, and discipline protects attention. Now let's go deeper. Most people think success requires doing more. It doesn't. It requires focusing more. Because doing more without direction leads to burnout. But focused effort leads to results. There is a massive difference. Busy is not the same as effective. Reactive is not the same as productive. Engaged is not the same as aligned. You have a choice. Be busy or be effective. That's the key. Now think about emotional drama. It creates the illusion of importance. It feels like something must be addressed immediately. It feels like something must be solved right now. But in reality, most drama resolves itself. Most conflicts fade. Most opinions disappear. Most emotional spikes pass. But your attention, once spent, does not return. That is why discipline matters. Because discipline protects attention from emotional theft. Now apply this to your life. When something pulls your attention, pause. Ask one question. Is this part of my mission? If yes, proceed. If no, ignore. That is control, not reaction. Control. You have a choice. React to everything or filter everything. That's the key. Now connect this to everything so far. You are learning not to react to everything. You are learning to pause before responding. You are learning to stop seeking approval. You are learning to detach from what you cannot control. You are learning to master silence. You are learning not to take things personally. You are learning to train through discomfort. And now you are learning to focus on the mission. All of it points to one truth. Your life is shaped by what you consistently give attention to. Not intention, attention. Because attention becomes action, and action becomes identity. So if your attention is scattered, your life is scattered. If your attention is focused, your life becomes structured. That is the difference. Now remember this. The world will always offer distractions. Always. Drama will always exist. Noise will always exist. Conflict will always exist. But your response determines everything. You can participate, or you can observe and continue forward. That's the key. And the strongest people choose forward. Always. Stay focused on the mission. Stay focused on the mission. Stay focused on the mission. Because your mission is what builds your future. Not your reactions. Not your distractions. Not your emotional engagement. Your mission. And when you protect your mission, something changes. Clarity returns. Energy returns. Progress returns. Because nothing is being wasted anymore. No attention wasted. No energy wasted. No time wasted. Only execution. Only discipline. Only direction. Now understand this deeply. Every distraction you ignore is a win. Every moment of focus is a gain. Every emotional trigger you refuse is strength. That is how unshakable people are built. Not through intensity, through consistency. And consistency requires focus. So guard it, protect it, direct it, because attention is life. And where your attention goes, your life follows. Now you have reached another level of control. You are no longer just reacting less. You are choosing more, choosing focus, choosing direction, choosing mission. And that is what separates reactive people from disciplined people. But there is still one final layer. The layer where discipline becomes identity, where behavior becomes automatic, where consistency becomes who you are. That is where we go next. Chapter 9. Build quiet discipline. Chapter 9. Build quiet discipline. Most people misunderstand success completely. They think success is loud. They think it is dramatic. They think it is emotional. They think it is a moment of intensity. But success is none of that. Success is usually boring. Let that sink in. Success is usually boring. It does not feel exciting in the moment. It does not feel emotional every day. It does not feel dramatic or extreme. It feels repetitive. It feels structured. It feels ordinary because it comes from repeated actions, not emotional excitement. That is the truth most people avoid. They chase excitement. They chase motivation. They chase inspiration. But they avoid repetition. And repetition is where success actually lives. You have a choice. You can chase intensity, or you can build consistency. That's the key. Most people fail not because they lack ability, but because they depend on emotion. If they feel motivated, they act. If they don't feel motivated, they stop. That is not discipline. That is emotional dependency. And emotional dependency cannot build anything stable. The disciplined person acts regardless of mood. Let that settle. The disciplined person acts regardless of mood. Not when they feel ready. Not when they feel inspired. Not when conditions feel perfect. They act because action is non-negotiable. That is the difference. You have a choice. Be led by mood or be led by discipline. That's the key. Now listen carefully. Motivation is temporary. It rises and falls. It appears and disappears. It is unpredictable. You cannot build your life on something unstable. But discipline is permanent. Discipline does not depend on feeling. Discipline depends on decision. A decision you repeat. A decision you enforce. A decision you protect. That is why discipline wins every time. Not because it is exciting, but because it is consistent. Now think about this. Most people start strong. They are motivated at the beginning. They are energized. They are focused. They are excited. But after a few days or weeks, motivation fades. And when motivation fades, so does effort. So does consistency. So does progress. And eventually, they stop. Not because they were incapable, but because they were inconsistent. Now compare that to disciplined people. They do not start stronger. They continue longer. That is the difference. Consistency defeats intensity every time. Say it again. Consistency defeats intensity every time. Again. Consistency defeats intensity every time. That is not theory. That is reality. Intensity burns out. Consistency builds results. Now let's bring this into behavior. When you wake up, You do not negotiate with yourself. You do not ask, "Do I feel like doing this?" You already decided. You act. When you train your body, you do not depend on motivation. You depend on structure. When you work on your goals, you do not depend on emotion. You depend on discipline. You have a choice. Negotiate with yourself daily, or remove negotiation completely. That's the key. Now let's go deeper. Most people lose discipline in small moments, not big ones. They can stay strong during challenges, but they collapse in ordinary moments. Skipping one task, delaying one action, avoiding one responsibility, and those small breaks compound. 1 becomes 10, 10 becomes a habit, and habit becomes identity. That is how discipline is lost. Quietly, slowly, without awareness. Now reverse it. Discipline is built the same way. One action, repeated, then repeated again, then again, until it becomes automatic. That is why we call it quiet discipline, because it does not need motivation. It does not need validation. It does not need emotional support. It simply exists. Now think about high performers. They are not constantly inspired. They are constantly committed. They do not ask how they feel. They ask what needs to be done. Then they do it. That is discipline. Simple, direct, unemotional. You have a choice. Wait for motivation or build discipline. That's the key. Now listen carefully. The mind will always try to negotiate. It will always offer excuses. It will always suggest delay. It will always look for comfort. That is normal. But you are not your impulses. You are your decisions. And discipline is choosing action over impulse. Every time. Now repeat this. Do it anyway. Say it again. Do it anyway. Again. Do it anyway. Because that phrase destroys hesitation. It removes negotiation. It removes emotional delay. It forces execution. And execution is everything. Now think about long-term success. It is not built in emotional peaks. It is built in ordinary days. Days when nothing feels exciting. Days when no one is watching. Days when motivation is absent. Those are the days that matter most, because those are the days most people quit. But disciplined people continue, not because it feels good, but because it is required. That is the separation. Now apply this to your life. When you do not feel like working, do it anyway. When you do not feel like training, do it anyway. When you do not feel like showing up, do it anyway. Not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. You have a choice. Obey emotion or obey discipline. That's the key. Now connect this to everything so far. You are learning not to react to everything. You are learning to pause before responding. You are learning to stop seeking approval. You are learning to detach from what you cannot control. You are learning to master silence. You are learning not to take things personally. You are learning to train through discomfort. You are learning to focus on the mission. And now you are learning to build quiet discipline. All of it leads to one identity, the unshakable person. Not reactive, not dependent, not inconsistent, but disciplined, steady, controlled, focused, and built through repetition. Now understand this deeply. Motivation will always fail you at some point, but discipline will not, because discipline does not depend on emotion. It depends on identity, and identity is built through repeated action. So every time you act without motivation, you strengthen identity. Every time you act through resistance, you strengthen identity. Every time you act despite discomfort, you strengthen identity. That is how transformation happens. Not in moments, in repetition. Now remember this. Do it anyway. Do it anyway. Do it anyway. That is not just a phrase. That is a system. A system for building consistency. A system for removing excuses. A system for becoming unshakable. And when you live by that system, something changes. You stop relying on feelings. You start relying on discipline. You stop waiting for motivation. You start executing on command. You stop being inconsistent. You start becoming reliable. And reliability is power. Now there is only one step left. The final identity shift. Becoming completely unshakable. Not just in behavior, but in mindset. Not just in action, but in identity. That is where we go next. Chapter 10. Become impossible to shake. Chapter 10. Become impossible to shake. You want stability. You want control. You want a life that does not collapse every time something goes wrong. But listen carefully. Becoming unshakable is not about becoming emotionless. That is where most people get it wrong. They think strength means silence inside. No fear, no anger, no stress, no reaction. That is false. Unshakable people feel everything, but they refuse to surrender control to anything. That's the key. You are not trying to remove emotion. You are learning to dominate it. You have a choice in every moment. React blindly or respond deliberately. Break or bend without losing structure. Spiral or stay centered. Nothing outside you gets to decide your internal state. Not people, not failure, not pressure, not approval, not rejection. You decide. That is what makes someone impossible to shake. Because the world keeps hitting, life keeps changing, problems keep coming, and still you remain. Not because life is soft, but because you are structured. And structure does not collapse under pressure. It adapts. Now understand this. Every lesson in this book was not separate. It was never random advice. It was construction. Piece by piece, you were being rebuilt. And now all those pieces combine into one. Identity, calm, focused, disciplined, detached. Not detached from life. Detached from chaos. Detached from emotional dependency. Detached from the need for constant validation. That is who you are becoming. And listen closely. This is not a mood. This is not something you practice only when life is easy. This is a standard, a permanent standard. You have a choice every day. Either you return to emotional reaction, or you return to identity. And identity wins every time. Because identity is repetition. Identity is what you repeatedly choose when nobody is watching. Calm is not what you feel. Calm is what you return to. Focus is not what happens when things are perfect. Focus is what remains when things are chaotic. Discipline is not motivation. Discipline is refusal. Refusal to abandon yourself when pressure increases. Detachment is not avoidance. Detachment is control. Control over what affects you internally. Now lock this into your mind. There is one sentence that must become automatic, not optional, not poetic, not motivational. Automatic. Nothing outside me controls me. Say it internally when things go wrong. Nothing outside me controls me. When someone disrespects you, nothing outside me controls me. When you fail, nothing outside me controls me. When you feel anxiety rising, nothing outside me controls me. This is not affirmation. This is programming. You are rewriting response patterns at the deepest level. Because right now, most people are controlled externally. A comment changes their mood. A failure defines their identity. A delay ruins their focus. A person's opinion becomes their direction. That is weakness disguised as sensitivity. You are removing that, not by force, by repetition, by discipline, by choosing the same response until it becomes automatic. Nothing outside me controls me. That becomes your standard, not your hope, your standard. Now here is what unshakable behavior looks like in real life. You do not rush to react. You pause. You observe. You decide. That gap between stimulus and response is where power lives. Most people never enter that gap. They are hijacked instantly. Emotion hits. Action follows. Regret comes after. You will break that cycle. You will interrupt it. You will notice the impulse, and you will not obey it. That is discipline. You will feel discomfort, and you will not negotiate with it. That is strength. You will be judged, and you will not collapse internally. That is control. You have a choice, always. And the more you choose control, the less effort it takes. Because repetition builds identity. Let this be clear. Being impossible to shake does not mean nothing affects you. It means nothing overrides you. You still feel. But feeling does not lead. You lead. You feel anger, but you do not become anger. You feel fear, but you do not obey fear. You feel doubt, but you do not follow doubt. That is mastery, and mastery is quiet. It does not announce itself. It shows itself in behavior, in consistency, in stability under pressure, in silence when others panic, in action when others freeze. That is what you are building. Now connect everything. Calm, focused, disciplined, detached. These are not traits you collect. They are one system, a unified identity. And every time you choose discipline over reaction, you reinforce it. Every time you return to focus, you strengthen it. Every time you refuse emotional surrender, you stabilize it. And every time you repeat the truth, nothing outside me controls me, you deepen it. This is how identity is built. Not in theory, in repetition under pressure. So understand this standard now. You are not someone who reacts to everything. You are not someone who is moved by everything. You are not someone who loses themselves when life shifts. You are someone who remains steady, clear, controlled. You have a choice. You always will, but your new default is simple. Nothing outside me controls me. That is the line you do not cross. That is the boundary you do not abandon. That is the identity you return to every time. And now the truth that closes this chapter. If you can remain unshaken, you become ungovernable by chaos. If you become ungovernable by chaos, you become intentional in every action. And if you become intentional in every action, your life stops being random. It becomes constructed, deliberate, designed. You have mastered emotional control. Now the next level is even more powerful, because silence is not emptiness. It is control expressed differently. Closing script 1 minute if you've listened this far. Remember one thing. Your future will not be determined by what happens to you. It will be determined by how you respond to what happens to you. The world will continue to criticize you. People will continue to misunderstand you. Problems will continue to appear. Obstacles will continue to test you. That will never change. What can change is you. You can become calmer. You can become stronger. You can become more disciplined. You can become impossible to shake. Stop reacting to every opinion. Stop reacting to every setback. Stop reacting to every emotion. Pause. Think. Choose. Because power belongs to the person who remains in control. Starting today, make this your standard. Stay calm when others panic. Stay focused when others quit. Stay disciplined when others react. And for the next 7 days, challenge yourself to catch every unnecessary reaction before it leaves your mouth. Pause, choose, and prove to yourself that nothing outside you controls you anymore.